photographers. For a trip to Hawaii, you want to capture the beautiful scenery with the best possible images. Now this is the Fujifilm GFX-50R, which, considering its size and weight, might not be anyone's first choice for travel. But the photos! The big deal here is the sensor. 51 megapixels on a medium format sensor. Full frame is 36 by 24. Medium format is 70% larger, just shy of 44 by 33 millimeters. And this is the same Bayer sensor used in the GFX-50S. Compared to 35 millimeter, it has a crop factor of 0.8. Let me give you a quick tour of the outside, go over a few configuration settings, and then we'll get out to take some photos.
It is large. In every dimension, it's larger than most DSLRs. It's a mirrorless design, and the design is practical more than stylish and evokes rangefinder cameras from the previous millennium. The body is magnesium alloy with aluminum dials. The 50R, oh I get it, R means rangefinder, uses the Fujifilm G mount, with a 65mm diameter exposing the sensor. Fujifilm sent it over with the Fujinon GF 32-64mm zoom lens, the 35mm equivalent of 25-50, a field of view 81 to 43 degrees. It tips the scale at 775 grams with battery and memory card, slightly less than its 50S sister. Add the 32-64 zoom lens, and the 50R totals over 1.6 kilos. That's the price of quality.
Now luckily, a substantial strap is included, but the front grip seems small for the camera. The thumb grip on the back is more suitable, and clearly this camera is designed for a commercial fashion or portrait photographer. I've brought it along on this trip to Hawaii to capture some landscapes.
The lens has an unmarked focus ring, a marked defined travel zoom ring, and an aperture ring, a constant f4 to f32, along with an auto aperture position, a C position to use the camera's command dial to set the aperture, and a key to release auto mode, so you don't accidentally dial from 32 to auto. Filter diameter is 77 millimeters, closest focus is 50 centimeters. The electronic viewfinder is to the left of the lens, which keeps the noses of right-eyed shooters off the LCD. On the left, a diopter, which adjusts enough to suit my prescription, pull it out, adjust, and lock in place.
It's a bright and clear 3.7 OLED screen. The LCD is an 8cm 2.4K dot screen, which tilts all the way up and halfway down. Now, it is a touch screen. Touch can be used to focus but not snap. For flick or swipe motions, access customizable control settings. Left for film simulation, right for white balance. Now, it works as a touchpad to select focus while shooting with the viewfinder. Although the controls are similar to other Fujifilm models, it's different enough to be fairly unique.
There's a nice touch here. When you flip the screen up, the viewfinder becomes inactive, so the LCD doesn't black out when you get too close to your body. Appreciated. The focus switch, single, continuous, manual, is on the back. And the back dial is familiar, but its companion front dial surrounds the shutter button. At first this seemed awkward, but I quickly adjusted. The ability to set the aperture with the lens ring using my left hand, the ISO with the right while watching the histogram in the viewfinder is a truly useful control configuration. And then, when I want to adjust the shutter speed, my thumb finds it easily. There's a small on-off switch. Although it's in the same place as other Fujifilm cameras, it's not part of the shutter release. And somehow, all of the switches and keys feel small compared to the size of the camera. On the top right panel, the shutter speed dial with a push-to-lock button, and the exposure compensation dial, as well as two small keys, one for drive settings, the other unlabeled, defaults to the on-screen ISO menu. The upper panel on the back has the LCD view mode selector, the delete key, and two more unlabeled function keys. By default, the left is exposure lock, the right focus lock. Of course, these can all be customized. The thumb grip has another unlabeled key, by default focus area, and the Q menu key. I found this an awkward position. The wide open space of the right side back panel has a joystick for focus selection and menu navigation. Interestingly, there's no control pad. I missed it for the first day or so, but quickly transitioned to using the joystick, which is responsive and easy to manage. Underneath, the menu, review, and display keys, and there's one more unlabeled function key in front. There's a flash hot shoe on top, but no included flash. The GFX-50R has two SD card slots. They're UHS-2 compliant. There's a dual mic remote connector on the left side and HDMI on the right. You'll be forgiven for nearly missing the USB-C type connector on the bottom, where you'll also find a 15-volt DC power in. Fujifilm supplies a cable connector to prevent accidental disconnects, but no cables. The menu will seem familiar to most who've used recent Fuji X series cameras. This review was recorded with firmware 1.0, the latest available. Of course, the first thing it wants to do is pair with my phone, and that enables it to set the time as well as capture GPS location information. Some Fujifilm cameras, like the XH1 pictured here, can now update firmware directly from the app. I'm finding that a very handy feature. Hopefully that works with the 50R too. I reset from the defaults to Superfine JPEG plus RAW. The Superfine setting uses a lower compression ratio than Fine. I decided to use lossless compressed for the RAW files. I bumped the focus points from 117 to 425 and set Face Eye Auto on. I set the shutter to mechanical and then configured the auto ISO. One is 1600 with 1/60th, 2 6400 with 1/125, 3 6400 with 1/60. My default is 2, so that's where I leave it. In setup, I turned the image display on to 1.5 seconds, and in display custom settings, I added the level, histogram, and highlight alert.
And now I'm ready to go shooting. With shutter and aperture on A, the lower left shows P for program mode.
For most of my shooting, I set the aperture ring to f4 and the shutter dial to A. Now the lower left shows A for aperture priority. For shutter priority, I set the shutter and return the aperture ring to A. But I find it easier to leave the aperture and set the shutter as needed, which is M for manual, but the auto ISO still manages the exposure for me. Using the dial, shutter can be set from 1 second to 1/4000. With the T setting, use the rear dial to set exposures from 1 1/3 seconds up to 60 seconds, and then with decreasing granularity up to 60 minutes. Bulb mode, the shutter stays open as long as it's pressed, can also be used up to 60 minutes. Incidentally, the shutter dial works in one-stop increments. Use the rear dial for 1/3 and 2/3 stop up and down from the setting. And now back to shutter priority to show you exposure compensation adjusted using the dedicated dial on top. The setting is displayed screen left. There's a 3-stop range, but turn the dial around to C and press the front function button to access a 5-stop EV range from the front dial. Press the button again to return the dial to ISO. ISO can be set from 100 to 12,800, and use the meter and the histogram to assist with manual exposure. Incidentally, assign histogram to a function key for an Easter egg, an RGB version, but there should be one more option once it's assigned to a key: off. I'd suggest you use the default for this, which is the touch swipe up, but that rarely works for me, so left and right swipes are more reliable. Face Detect overrides the meter mode selection. The menu calls meter selection photometry, and like other dimmed selections, the selector skips over it. I'd appreciate a help dialog that indicated why it's not available, or the inclusion of Face Detect as a meter mode. With Face Detect off, the selections are multi, center-weighted, spot, which can be interlocked with the focus spot, and average. And now that you've seen those, I'm turning Face Eye back on. Below 100, there's a low setting equivalent to 50. Above 12.8, there are three high settings, 25.6, 51.2, and 102,400. But I would suggest that if you've bought the 50R, that's not a compromise you're willing to make. Reviewing the photos at home, I found 6400 to be quite usable. Even 12.8 works for a dark scene, but my tolerance is reached at 25.6, and 51.2 is too mushy to consider. The switch on the back selects the focus mode: single, continuous, and manual. The function button on the thumb grip opens the area selection: single, zone, and wide. Hopefully, a firmware upgrade will add all available on other recent Fujifilm models and super useful. With single, press the joystick to set the focus point. Select the size, there are 6, with the back dial. Press the joystick to return to center. Of course, touch, use the right on-screen button, is also an option. The 50R uses contrast detection for focus. The zone selection, which can be sized to 3x3, 5x5, or 7x7 on the 117-point grid, is also movable. Wide, or auto area, also uses the 117-point grid, typically focusing on the closest contrasty object. Switch to continuous, and wide becomes tracking. With its high resolution and shallow depth of field, the 50R requires an exacting attention to focus and provides several manual focus assists. In manual focus mode, an on-screen distance ruler indicates the focus plane distance and also the depth of field as indicated by the blue area. Press the rear dial to punch into an expanded view. Use the joystick to move the expanded area. Or hold the rear dial to switch to peaking, displaying the edges of the object in focus. The menu has color and sensitivity options for peaking. There are two options if you want to speed up focus. There's Rapid AF. According to the manual, this speeds focusing but reduces display quality temporarily. I've had it on. You probably didn't notice. Pre-AF is a continuous focus mode. The camera never stops focusing. And there's a focus bracket feature which requires a little trial and error to determine the right number of images to take for your scene. It's useful for macro work, either to find the exact right focus spot or to combine the images for a focus stack in Photoshop. Touch swipe right for white balance, auto, the usual presets, Kelvin settings from 2500 to 10,000. Capturing a custom white balance, there are 3 slots to save them, is as easy as pointing the camera at a gray card. The presets and custom settings can be interactively fine-tuned across the red, green, and blue-amber axes. Once you have your white balance, swipe left to select a film simulation. These are Fuji's custom color profiles, digitally emulating color film types, as well as Acros, a black and white film, customizable with 3 color filters. There's a standard mono, also with filters, as well as a sepia simulation. And if there's a reason to select a Fujifilm camera over the competition, this is it. Now, I'm going to show you in-camera JPEG images taken with the simulations viewed at 1:1. These subtle variations in color reproduction can help define an image and create a mood, but I can't do justice to this feature in a video, and there's no point in judging them based on a single image or using the same lighting. Each has attributes which lend themselves to specific scenes. Press the Q menu for further fine-tuning to highlight shadows, color, and sharpness, although these are not interactive and don't provide much latitude. Further highlight and shadow adjustments can be made with the dynamic range setting, which can be set to 200 with ISOs 200 and up, and 400 with 400 and up. No worries if you're using auto ISO. And on the menu, you'll also find a grain effect. You'll have to look closely to see it. And the color chrome effect, which provides weak and strong enhancement to color and shadows. The increased color depth here creates a richer and more detailed image. The 50R uses a focal plane shutter. You can see and hear it in this 1-second exposure using the mechanical shutter. The electronic shutter is silent and increases the top shutter speed to 1/16,000, but limits the ISO from 100 to 12,800. Depending on the speed of the object and the shutter, there may be image shear on objects moving across the shutter plane. The electronic front curtain uses the mechanical shutter up to 1/640 and then reverts to mechanical. With the mechanical front off, it looks and sounds like this. If you find the full mechanical a little clunky, try this setting. Mechanical plus electronic allows the full range of shutter speeds up to 1/16,000 and switches to electronic as needed. The last setting combines the last two settings into one. It's the most versatile unless, like me, you like the old school sensation of the full mechanical operation. There is an extensive flash menu, and it's beyond my area of expertise. The top panel's drive key opens the drive mode menu to access burst and bracket modes, as well as multi-exposure and video. And as you might expect, these are not industry-leading continuous speeds. Using the mechanical shutter with all manual settings, the 50R captures 3 superfine JPEGs per second for 15 seconds, slowing to just under 2 per. Between the slow refresh and the blackout, it's difficult to follow moving objects. The silent electronic shutter takes slightly less than 2 per second. Including focus bracket, there are 6 bracket modes: exposure, ISO, film simulation, white balance, and dynamic range. The exposure bracket can take up to 9 images, with a range up to 3 stops. Check the graph at the bottom to see that captures a 24-stop range. Interesting, powerful. Multi-exposure. I'm not sure how this feature made it in while Fujifilm expects you to do manual panoramas. The first image appears while you're composing the second. That's helpful, but there are no blending options and only 2 images are possible. Not included on the drive menu is the self-timer, 10 or 2-second delay, and the hack here is that it works with the continuous mode to take 5 consecutive images. Also not included with drive settings is the interval timer, and it's pretty full-featured. Interval from 1 second to 24 hours, and the number of images can be set from 1 to 999 and infinity, then set a start time and go. If your intention is to create a video from your time-lapse images, use a smaller image setting like S16:9, which is still slightly larger than 4K video. It would be nice if this included a video output option. There are some aspect formats that you don't usually find. Pixel counts are displayed at the bottom of the screen along with the number of images that can be saved on the remaining space on your SD card. 4:3 provides the largest resolution. The others are all less than 51 megapixels. There's a 38 megapixel square mode, perfect for black and white portraits, as well as a super wide 65:24 setting, 25 megapixels, useful in a camera that doesn't have a panorama mode. But let's face it, if you're a photographer with a 50R, you're taking multiple shots and stitching your panoramas, like I did here. Hidden in the shooting settings is a 35mm format mode, which uses the 36:24mm central area of the sensor for a 30 megapixel image. This can be useful when shooting with a 35mm lens using an adapter. Video seems like an afterthought here. In spite of the 51 megapixel sensor, the highest video resolution is HD, available at frame rates up to 30. That makes me wonder why video is even included. Recordings are limited to 30 minutes and saved in 4GB chunks. Hopefully a firmware upgrade will enable single-file recordings. The 50R does support HDMI output of 60 frames to an external recorder. The mic input is the non-standard micro size. You'll find on-screen meters and an input level control setting. A full set of playback options includes a RAW conversion module with an extensive set of settings and options, including the ability to save TIFF files. And there's a voice memo feature to save a note with an image. One interesting capability is tethered shooting. The power and USB ports seem to be specifically designed with that in mind. The 50R supports both Capture One and Lightroom, as well as Fujifilm's free X-Acquire desktop app. Switch the camera's connection, PC connection, to USB tethered auto. The app will recognize the camera and settings and display thumbnails as photos are taken. Settings can customize the folder and specify if you want RAW and/or JPEG files copied. The app can also back up and restore camera settings to your PC. While most Fujifilm cameras use the Model 126 battery, the 50R uses a larger Model 125 battery. A charger with interchangeable AC plug is included, along with the plugs you'll need for most destinations. An optional battery grip holds one additional battery and is useful for portrait mode shooting. There's an interesting battery age display. A shutter counter would also be useful to check if you're approaching the 150,000 life cycle.
Now, for those who need to know, both the camera and the lens say made in Japan, but as I say, I expect Fujifilm's quality control to be the same wherever the camera is made. Thanks for watching. If you have questions or comments, I do enjoy interacting with you, so post your relevant questions and civil comments below. When you're traveling, shoot until your memory card is full and your battery is empty, and if this video helps, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. Thanks.